Disruption.
Disruptive technologies.
A disruptive innovation.
Disruptor.
A technology disruption.
For the last 30 years, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and startups have eagerly embraced the concept of disruptive innovation. Now, we've seen this in Silicon Valley's TechCrunch Disrupt.
Or, if that's too embarrassing, there's also a Bluetooth suppository, and that goes right where you think it goes here.
And the Glass Onion.
Disruptors have assembled!
But lately, big tech's been in layoff mode. We've seen a parade of TV shows about disruptors turned scammers. Also, Teslas just keep like blowing up. Like, you buy that car for a lot of money and then it just self-destructs because Elon. It seems that disruptive innovation may not be as solid a business strategy as we've been led to believe. So is disruption ushering in a techno-utopia? Or is this business philosophy kind of, well, a scam? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition, Disruption Culture. Deep or dumb? As long as there's been a marketplace, there's been disruption. Democracy disrupted the supremacy of the monarchy. The Model T disrupted the horse and carriage. Coca-Cola disrupted water, and BTS disrupted One Direction. However, disruption didn't emerge as a culture until the mid-1990s. In reaction to massive layoffs in the 80s, aspiring C-suite rebels created startups to take back power from the man and forge their own commercial destinies. These individuals were later dubbed disruptors by Harvard professor Clay Christensen, who wrote about the startup phenomenon and the downfall of well-established companies in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma. Most notably, Christensen wrote about his theory of disruptive innovation, the pattern in which up-and-coming companies develop new technologies to offer cheaper and inferior alternatives to products already available on the market. This was the technique companies like Zara used to start the fast fashion phenomenon. Disruptive innovation took the business world by storm, and it would eventually be dubbed the most influential business theory of the early 21st century. Over that period, companies like Tesla, Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, and Netflix were applauded as major disruptors, and everyone else wanted to hop on the bandwagon. Even long-standing companies hired innovation specialists to help their businesses wreak profitable havoc. But as the gospel of disruptive innovation spread far and wide, no one really questioned whether or not it actually worked. That is, until another Harvard professor, Jill Lepore, came along with several critiques of the theory in 2014. And the business world was not happy about it. Firstly, Lepore took issue with Christensen's advice to use theory to guide data collection. As anyone who's taken 8th grade biology knows, this is the opposite of how good science works. And turns out, in The Innovator's Dilemma, Christensen selectively included case studies that supported his theory of how disruptive companies beat their more established competitors and neglected evidence that made them look kind of dumb. Dippin' Dots failed to disrupt any well-known companies in the ice cream market. How does the theory explain that? Also, in the comments, let me know if you had Dippin' Dots. They were my favorite on school field trips. Got to go to the Kennedy Space Center once, and they had Dippin' Dots there, and it was like, this is the future. They're serving them near the space shuttle, so, but now, why would you eat those? They're terrible. The second issue Lepore had with Christensen's theory is that it's not reliably predictive. It only works in hindsight. Lepore points out that in 2007, Christensen told Businessweek that the prediction of the theory would be that Apple won't succeed with the iPhone. 5 years and $150 billion later, Christensen took back his original prediction and argued that iPhones had been disruptive after all. He'd just been mistaken that they disrupt phones when in actuality, they disrupted laptops. The third major issue Lepore had with the theory of disruptive innovation is that it's basically bulletproof via circular reasoning. It goes a little something like this. If an established company doesn't disrupt hard enough, it will fail. But when a startup succeeds, it's because it disrupted. But when it fails, it's a success because failure is a hallmark of disruptive innovation. When an established company succeeds, it's only because it hasn't failed yet. And when any of these things happen, it's only further evidence of disruption. Did you follow that? Because I have no idea what I just said, but I guess it sounds right according to these geniuses. Despite these obvious issues, the majority of the problems surrounding disruption culture stem from how the theory's been co-opted by venture capitalists, thought leaders, and society. Quick note, we should not have thought leaders. That shouldn't be a term that exists. We can have intellectuals or philosophers or theorists, but thought leaders? I'm good. The term disruption had been used so much, it almost ceased to have any meaning. Sort of like dude, or like, leading some to deem it a meaningless buzzword. Even Christensen himself wasn't thrilled with some of the ways this theory was being applied, saying, "I never thought that people would then flexibly take an idea, twist it, and use it to justify whatever they wanted to do in the first place." Why was the concept of disruption too tempting to resist? Well, quite frankly, it's because Americans were just obsessed with innovation. Now, in the wake of the Enlightenment, technological innovation was connected to humanistic principles, i.e., we innovate to expand our reach, understanding, and expression of what makes us human. And a type of moral goodness was baked into the very concept. But the twin forces of global militarism and capitalism stepped in as war and commercial exploitation became profitable. Today, innovation is arguably quite anti-human, in that it's driven wholly by the market. Even innovations that actually hurt humanity are still good in the light of market logic. You know, like fracking. You know what fracking is, right? It's probably bad. Maybe you like it. Maybe in the comments you'll be like, "Oh, you don't like fracking, you and it's just like, come to my house and say it, big boy." The hype around disruption culture is so huge, it's difficult to know whether it's deserved or not. MLMs, multi-level marketing schemes, are technically disruptors. By turning everyday people into salespeople who sell directly to their networks, they render traditional retail obsolete. But of course, the business world views MLMs as a scam.
It's not a pyramid scheme. It's not even a scheme per se.
Which they are, and we did a whole video on that. You go watch it. And yet, interestingly enough, disruptors use a lot of the same tactics with little to no criticism. So what do MLMs and startups have in common? Well, for one, both focus the narrative on the winners. Disruption fails more often than it succeeds. When it's talked about in the business community, it feels like every company who's ever disrupted is a dark horse turned Kentucky Derby champion. The media pushes all the failed companies under the rug to praise the few lottery winners, like Skype, YouTube, and Facebook. This is the equivalent of convincing people to buy into Mary Kay by showing the one saleswoman who won the pink Cadillac instead of the thousands of salespeople who were exploited and lost tons of money. When a startup succeeds, it serves as confirmation bias that the system works, and more existentially, that the American dream is alive and well. And because of this circular reasoning, if disruptors fail, they're dismissed as not having disrupted hard enough. Never mind that 75% of startups go under, 90% never generate revenue, and they have twice the employee turnover of established companies, blah, blah, blah. Also, much like many leaders in MLM circles, many disruptors become celebrities with cool dogmas. Mark Zuckerberg said, "Move fast and break things." Steve Jobs encouraged people to put their dent in the universe. While these principles sound pretty sick at first glance, they're also conveniently used as an excuse to mistreat employees. As Forbes writer Phil Lewis writes, many scale disruptors hypocritically argue that they're upending industries for the benefit of humanity when their endeavors leave a pile of human roadkill in their wake. Look no further than WeWork's Adam Neumann. He preached that his company stood for we, not me, going so far as trying to copyright the word we. Can a lawyer in the comments explain how people can copyright words? That just seems insane. He manipulated the idea of collective altruism to encourage his employees into working brutal hours. Then, this altruist left his community to cash out and laid off 2,400 people. Understandably, massive protests ensued. The underlying issue is the qualities of the disruptors that made them successful, self-confident, decisive, willful, and confrontational, also can make them terrible managers. As Lewis notes, in high-stress situations, disruptor bosses often rely on intimidation to get their way. They also foster adversarial relationships among coworkers and generally create work environments that are psychologically unsafe. In other words, imagine working for Plankton at the Chum Bucket. Part of the problem is that many disruptors don't want to be managers. They want to create a business, sell it while it's hot, and move on. Their priority is profit, not people, and it shows. On average, startup employees work 50 to 60 hours per week, which is 25 to 50% more than the average American worker. Also akin to MLMs, disruptive companies shift risks onto their employees, often via the gig economy. Uber, DoorDash, Postmates, and Instacart shift responsibilities previously held by employees onto their beloved independent contractors. They promise the alluring opportunity to be your own boss. And by that they mean assume all legal and financial responsibilities. Now, contractors get to pay for their healthcare out of pocket, cover business expenses like car maintenance, gas, and insurance, and take the financial hit when work is slow. We also did a whole video about the gig economy, so check that out if you work in the gig economy and work is slow and you need stuff to watch to not focus on the fact that we live in an economic system that's just trying to kill us all. So is disruption a scam? Not exactly, but it's used as an excuse to run a business like one. Of course, not all disruptors are bad. Impossible Foods made it easier to cut back on meat consumption, which is good for the environment. Warby Parker makes glasses and contact lenses way more accessible. Patreon, our favorite disruptor, circumvented the advertising, marketing, and data collection side of things to ensure creatives like us are paid for their work. We actually love Patreon, and fun fact, they give creators of content a huge share of all the money they earn, more than any other. So if you ever hear someone being like, hey, join our Patreon, it's probably because Patreon takes care of creators. Hypothetically, Wisecrack Patreon, click the link, let's go. We're not arguing against change. Disruption is a natural part of the business ecosystem and the human condition. What feels not so great is how disruption culture has been co-opted by business leaders to treat workers like cattle. We've talked a lot about disruption culture from the perspective of business leaders and venture capitalists. But what happens when employees get bit by the disruption bug? Shockingly, the innovative bosses don't love it. When employees quiet quit, which is just working a normal amount, or act their wage, they're lazy and entitled. Because disruption can't disrupt the economic, labor, or political systems themselves, but simply disrupt the ways that a small number of people are able to make money within that system. And employees working less and getting paid more doesn't help the bottom line. We saw workers get their own disruptive moment in late 2020 with the Great Resignation, when the power shifted in favor of workers, forcing employers to up their game and introduce flexible work arrangements, increased wages, and revamped benefits. Along with this, a recent resurgence of unions has triggered a new wave of disruption. Last year, union representation jumped 53%, and a Gallup poll found labor unions reached their highest level of public support in the US since 1965. So is there any middle option between owner-centric disruption at the cost of workers or worker-centric disruption at the cost of, well, billionaires? A recent example is a UK study on the possibility of a 4-day work week. 61 companies with around 2,900 employees spent 6 months piloting the program, and the results were pretty awesome. Employees reported 39% less stress, 71% less burnout, and overall increases in mental and physical health. But it wasn't just a win for the workers, as when compared to a similar period from previous years, organizations reported revenue increases 35% on average. And the number of staff leaving companies decreased by 57% during the trial period. And 56 of the 61 companies that participated are going to continue with the 4-day work week. So hey, Enthusiast Gaming Incorporated, who owns Wisecrack, why not give it a try? It worked for these companies, it could work for you. While it's not a total upending of the system, it's a model of work that could radically change workers' lives, giving them a full day back to do whatever the they want with. However, high inflation and fear of an impending recession are slowly shifting power back toward employers. Over 100,000 employees have been laid off by big tech this year, and media outlets are reporting that 80% of people regret quitting in the Great Resignation. They're now calling it the Great Regret. And yet, despite fears of a global recession, about 61% of American workers are thinking about quitting in 2023. With US workers refusing to back down, maybe there's hope employees can hold on to their bargaining power and continue to disrupt the business world for years to come. Or we'll get disrupted out of our homes and become hunter-gatherers again. Who knows? But what do you think? Is disruption culture the best path to progress? Or is it just kind of a scam? Can employees use disruption to reclaim power and beat the system? Or at least call it a tie? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much to our patrons for their support, who use a really cool disruptive platform to help support our channel directly in a way that's not mediated via advertising and algorithms. We love it. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who watches this channel. We appreciate the likes, the comments, and subscriptions. Please keep them up. It means a lot to us. But in the meantime, stay disruptive, and we'll see you later.